Order. Welcome to meeting number 15 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills and Social Development and the Status of Persons with Disabilities. Today's meeting is taking place again in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th. Members who are appearing in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website, so you are aware the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. Given the ongoing pandemic situation and in light of the recommendation from health authorities as well as the directive of the Board of Internal Economy on October the 19th, 2021, to remain healthy and safe, all those attending in persons shall follow the outlined protocols. As Chair, I will be enforcing these measures for the duration of the meeting, and I thank members in advance for their cooperation. To ensure an orderly meeting, I would like to outline a few rules to follow. Members and witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. If interpretation is lost, please inform me immediately, and we will ensure interpretation is properly restored before resuming the proceedings. The raise hand feature at the bottom of the screen can be used at any time if you wish to speak or alert the chair. For members participating in person, proceed as you usually would when the whole committee is meeting in person in a committee room. Keep in mind the Board of Internal Economy's guidelines for mask use and health protocols. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you are on the video conference, please click on the microphone icon to unmute yourself. Those in the room, your microphone will be controlled by the Proceedings and Verifications Officer. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. This assists the interpreters to properly translate the meeting. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. With regard to a speaking list, I will, with the clerk, endeavor to maintain a proper speaking list. We are meeting today on the motion, Standing Order 108.2, and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, February 3rd, 2022, that the committee resume its study of labor shortages, working conditions, and the care economy. I would like to welcome our witnesses to begin our discussion with 5 minutes of opening remarks, followed by questions. As an individual, Naomi Lightman, Assistant Professor of Sociology, University of Calgary. Sarah Watts-Reinard, Chief Executive Officer of Polytechniques Canada. Matthew Henderson, Director of Policy. Statistics Canada, José Bejean, Director General, Labour Market, Education and Socioeconomic Wellbeing. Vincent Dale, Director, Centre for Labour Market Information. We will start with Dr. Naomi Lightman for 5 minutes, please. And I would ask the witnesses to keep their remarks within the 5 minute or less timeline. Dr. Lightman, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you for the invitation to testify for this important study. My area of research expertise is in care work and its intersections with gender, race, and immigration status. The focus of my testimony will be on how we can best improve working conditions in the care economy to better meet the needs of the often exploited women who provide care for our vulnerable seniors, children, and people with disabilities. To begin, I'll note that a large body of research conclusively demonstrates that the care economy is distinctive. Across wealthy nations, my research finds that care work is devalued, both socially and economically. People working in care, such as personal support workers, healthcare aides, and childcare workers, are doing jobs that we consider 3D: dirty, difficult, and dangerous. These are jobs that most Canadians have no interest in doing. Yet these workers are paid significantly less than others doing comparable work. This low pay is in part because the jobs are often associated with quote unquote women's work, and because care work is often thought to be unimportant, low skill, or marginal. We know that Canada's care economy is comprised overwhelmingly of women of color. By most estimates, in Canada, over 90% of these workers are women, And specifically, it is racialized immigrant women who are doing these jobs, and in particular, Filipina and Black women. Care workers are especially vulnerable due to the frontline nature of their employment, as well as their gender, citizenship status, race, and/or class. My recent report, conducted in conjunction with the Calgary Immigrant Women's Association and the Parkland Institute, focused on the impacts of the pandemic on healthcare aides working in long-term care. We interviewed 25 immigrant women healthcare aides who detailed how the pandemic had exacerbated their financial precarity, their physical and mental distress at work. They also spoke about their systematic exclusion from institutional decision-making processes. I will now provide 6 recommendations for how to best improve working conditions in the care economy. I do not wish to get involved in a discussion of federalism in Canada, and I'm certainly not an expert in federalism, but these recommendations focus on how the government, in collaboration with the provinces and territories, could better fill Canada's labor market needs and protect these essential care workers. First, overrepresentation of immigrant workers within caring occupations, there is a need to streamline processes of credential recognition for care workers and reduce the associated costs so they can work in the jobs for which they were trained in their home countries. As it stands, care workers are overwhelmingly trained as licensed practical nurses or nurse practitioners, but they end up working in jobs as personal support workers because of the practical difficulty of transferring their credentials. Second, given widespread and growing shortages in healthcare occupations in Canada, there is a need to further prioritize caring jobs in Canada's immigration point selection system. Third, there is a need to ensure higher wages and pay equity within care occupations. The pandemic has highlighted how essential these jobs are, yet they remain low wage and precarious. This means raising hourly wages and ensuring proper employment equity standards. Fourth, there is a need to increase physical and mental health benefits and supports for care workers and their families. These workers experience high levels of burnout and distress, which was only exacerbated by the pandemic. At the provincial level, this means implementing guaranteed paid sick days. At the federal level, it means supporting access to affordable childcare, mental health supports, and affordable dental and pharma care. Fifth, in collaboration with provinces, there is a need to ensure that privately operated long-term care and other healthcare operators do not pay lower wages with fewer benefits for care workers than public operators. As well, there is a need to legislate higher staff-to-resident ratios in healthcare settings and a need to reduce or eliminate the use of casual employees and temp agencies in favor of full-time permanent work in the care economy. Sixth, and finally, there is a need to ensure that the voices of care workers are included in all decision-making processes within the care economy going forward, moving away from top-down decision-making processes. So I'm happy to speak to any of this further, either in the rounds of questioning that follow or in follow-up with any members of the committee. Thank you.
Dr. Lightman, now to who is speaking for Polytechniques Canada?
Well.
Madame Renard, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair and honorable members. I appreciate the opportunity to address you as part of this important study on labor shortages, particularly as they impact Canada's caring economy. I come to this topic as the CEO at Polytechnics Canada, a not-for-profit association representing 13 research-intensive, publicly funded polytechnics and institutes of technology. Collectively, our members provide education and training to more than 375 learners each year. Polytechnics provide industry-aligned programming that builds in real-world experience to ensure graduates enter the labor market ready to hit the ground running. Our members offer a breadth of credentials across sectors in high demand, including four-year bachelor's degrees, diplomas, and graduate certificates. Frankly, Canada's polytechnics train the vast majority of workers in the caring economy, and this includes practical nurses, respiratory therapists, veterinary technicians, personal support workers, early learning professionals, dental hygienists, and many others. Their close relationships with employers in these sectors also mean polytechnics are leaders in the delivery of upskilling and reskilling opportunities, including professional development and micro-credentials. During the pandemic, this has included training to administer COVID-19 vaccines and short courses for nurses to enhance their urgent care skills. The training offered by polytechnics is responsive and relevant, flexing as new requirements emerge. Because skill shortages tend to be urgent by the time anyone is talking about them, this ability to develop and deliver training quickly, whether to students or to existing employees, is absolutely critical. As I reflect on the ways Canada's polytechnics can mitigate skills and talent shortages in the caring economy, two overarching policy recommendations come to mind. The first is to increase access, navigation, and support for lifelong learning. There is a long-standing recognition of the need for reliable, timely labor market information. And while there are many groups developing LMI, from a general sense of skills and demand to data that is more industry and occupation specific, they rarely use comparable language or methodologies, making it difficult to integrate or navigate. Even if Canadians knew where to find this information, LMI is rarely linked to specific jobs or training opportunities. Today's technology is capable of something much better. Every Canadian should have access to a dashboard that highlights specific areas of skill shortage in their occupation or region, and a directory of where those skills can be acquired. In short, a Netflix for training opportunities. At last count, Canada's polytechnics had more than 17,000 short-term upskilling and reskilling programs on the books, many related to the caring economy. We'd like to see more deliberate navigation to these opportunities, allowing users to understand where training is available, at what cost, duration, and delivery method. Better navigation stands to amplify the impact of lifelong learning supports like the Canada Training Benefit. Second, the federal government can make ongoing investments in post-secondary learning infrastructure a part of Canada's growth and development plan. To deal with existing and emerging skill shortages, post-secondary infrastructure must keep pace with industry needs, exposing learners to the latest tools, technologies, and labs. In two previous post-secondary infrastructure programs, the last more than 6 years ago, the case was clear. Institutions enhanced research facilities and built dynamic new spaces for Canada's talent pipeline. The need for a modern learning infrastructure is foundational to addressing talent and skill shortages. This will inevitably include physical and digital infrastructure that matches the pace and expectations of business. It's hard to develop tomorrow's talent with yesterday's spaces, equipment, and tools. And just one last thought for the committee's consideration as a part of this study. Canada's post-secondary institutions themselves are not immune to acute skill shortages, and this has huge consequences for the talent pipeline. So for example, in February, British Columbia increased the number of nursing seats at its post-secondary institutions by 600. Manitoba also recently increased theirs by 400, both in direct response to urgent and imminent shortages in that occupation. And as I've said, a defining feature and benefit of polytechnic education is a direct connection to industry, including an emphasis on bringing professional practitioners into classrooms and labs as instructors. So when demand is on the rise, and so too are salary pressures, something that publicly funded institutions have really a limited means to address. So when it comes to skill shortages in the caring economy, Canada's polytechnics, I think, are well positioned to respond. There are, however, important ways this capacity can be nurtured and maximized. Thank you for the opportunity to address you today. I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Madame Watts-Reinard. Now, Madame Bégin for 5 minutes, please.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, committee members, thank you for inviting me to share some insights on the labor shortages and labor market imbalances affecting the Canadian economy since the pandemic, including in the care economy. Most indicators are pointing to an increasingly tight labor market in Canada, with the demand for workers accelerating to record levels during the second half of 2021. Job vacancies in the fourth quarter rose 80% compared with pre-pandemic levels, reflecting broad-based increases across provinces and industrial sectors. Last month, the unemployment rate fell to a near historic level of 5.5%, while the participation rate reached a record high among core-aged workers. These increasingly tight labor market conditions have resulted in lengthier hiring processes, as evidenced by a rise in the proportion of vacancies open for 2 months or more. The unprecedented labor demand placed by COVID-19 on the healthcare system contributed to the growth in vacancies in the healthcare and social assistance sector. There were almost twice as many job vacancies as 2 years earlier in the sector, despite a 6% rise in payroll employment. With businesses struggling to recruit staff, some have been adjusting their hiring strategies. For example, some employers appear to be lowering educational requirements to attract workers. In late 2021, about 10% of workers who had a high school diploma or less had recently started jobs that typically require university education, up from 4% in late 2019. To help attract and retain staff, businesses are also adjusting their wage plans. In the 2 years leading up to November 2021, wages among new hires rose by 10%, compared with 6% for established employees. In the fourth quarter of 2021, almost half of businesses reported that they planned to raise wages for existing employees over the coming year. While wages have been on an upward trend since the fall of 2021, their growth has remained below the inflation rate. The COVID-19 pandemic has underscored the essential nature of the care sector, but also contributed to worsening already existing labor shortages. Census data show that in 2016, care workers made up nearly 1/5 of the total employed population in Canada. Perhaps not surprisingly, women represented the majority of paid care workers, accounting for 3/4 of all care workers. Overall, workers in care and non-care occupations were as likely to belong to a population group designated as a visible minority, 22% versus 21%. There were, however, slightly higher proportions of Black and Filipino people among care workers than among non-care workers, particularly in specific occupational groups. For example, Black and Filipino people each represented 10% of workers in assisting occupations in support of health services and were highly overrepresented among nurses' aides, orderlies, and patient service associates. Labor force survey data suggests that in recent years, workers in care occupations were less likely to have a permanent job than those in non-care occupations. They were also more likely to hold more than one job at the same time. Overall, workers in care occupations were slightly less likely to work full-time than those in non-care occupations. The quality of employment in the care economy is uneven, with workers covered by a collective agreement, 57%, generally having better working conditions than those who are not. Statistics Canada will continue to monitor and report on labor demand pressures that are felt in the various sectors of the Canadian labor market, including those of the care economy. Mr. Chair, this concludes my opening statement. Thank you.
Jean, we will now open the floor for questions, beginning with Madame Kusi for 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for joining us today. I'll begin my questions with Mr. Dale.
Mr. Dale, besides the blip caused by Omicron, would you say that there is an upwards trend in job vacancy rates?
Good morning, everyone. And in response to your specific question, we can look at job vacancies since 2015 when the current survey was introduced. And yes, we do see an increase in vacancies between 2015 and 2019, and then a sharp acceleration between 2019 onwards in association with the pandemic. So in summary, the increase in vacancies is long-term, at least over the past 7 years, and it has accelerated over the COVID period.
Thank you, Mr. Dale. And based upon your gathering of information and evaluation of this information, what, in your opinion, do you believe is causing the increase of job vacancy rates?
So when we report on job vacancies, we're careful to point out that there may be an increase in vacancies can point to several factors. It could, for example, be a rapid reopening of an industry where there's an adjustment period required for matches to be made between available workers and vacancies. It may be an indication of normal economic activity where there's turnover, transition, within an industry. And in some cases, it may be a shortage, either an absolute shortage or some type of mismatch between the working conditions associated with a job and the willingness of available workers to take those jobs, as well as geographic imbalances, so that there may not be a shortage, but there may be an imbalance between where available workers are located and where the vacancies are located. So there's many factors, and it's important to interpret vacancies within a specific industry and occupation in the context of a broader set of labor market and economic indicators.
Okay, that's a very thorough overview. Thank you very much. Would you say there's one predominant reason out of all of the ones you've indicated? Because certainly you have indicated many different possibilities across many different sectors and across many different regions. But would you say there's anything predominant?
I wouldn't be able to say there's a predominant factor. Again, I'd repeat, it's very important to look at specific industry, regional factors, and sort of analyze a given situation, analyze particular situation using job vacancy statistics, but also employment trends, unemployment trends, and broader economic indicators. So I'll just reemphasize there's no single explanation for overall job vacancies.
Okay, so a multitude of reasons. Thank you. Mr. Dale, how long would you expect the upward trajectory of job vacancies to continue for?
It's a very good question. We don't have the ability to predict the future. What we do is closely monitor the situation month to month and year to year. So we have seen since the spike in the late summer and early fall, we have seen a small decrease in vacancies over the late fall and winter period. Some of that will be associated with seasonality, and we'll have to interpret some of that decline with caution and see how things develop over the spring and summer. So, we can monitor vacancies month to month. We can project, our colleagues at ESDC and in the provinces and territories can project demand for specific occupations 5 or 10 years into the future. But unfortunately, I don't have a crystal ball to project job vacancies in the medium term.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Dale. We can't predict the future, but we certainly can look at trends. But I appreciate all of that information. Thank you very much. Ms. Watts-Reinard, please. In my assessment, to decrease job vacancies, we either need to add more people through immigration or develop more automation. What role do you see polytechnic schools playing in increasing automation and innovation?
I think that one of the things I would say there is that there's vast ability for the institutions to be thinking about simulation, thinking about hybrid learning, personalized learning, and all of that takes equipment, as I've said, a post-secondary infrastructure that would support increasing the number of students and their opportunities to take on those roles.
One issue we also see with automation is the high cost for small and medium-sized enterprises to enter into these automation initiatives. Would you have any suggestions based upon the work of your students and faculty and trends, once again, as to how we could possibly lower these costs for business?
Maybe I'll pass it on to my colleague, Matt, because I know that he's put together some specific examples to share.
Thanks, Sarah, and thank you for having us here today. The one piece on supporting businesses, the Polytechnic model of research is really kind of partner driven and responsive to industry. So we have members across the country working with healthcare providers and healthcare organizations to ensure that they're automating, basically being an onboard to the innovation, the business innovation that's required to kind of propel those businesses to move forward. So on one hand, our member institutions across the country are providing the education and training for the human capital that's required for the caring economy. And on the other side of the equation, the research arm of our member institutions through the Applied Research Office is really supporting business to onboard new technologies, whether they be digital or simulated learning, as Sarah said, to ensure that these healthcare organizations from the private sector are also kind of moving, being moved forward along their innovation journey as well. So from that perspective, there is one federal program, the College and Community Innovation Program, that explicitly funds college and polytechnic applied research. And increasing in support for this program, for example, would certainly amplify and scale the amount of research that our members are able to do with the healthcare and the caring economy writ large.
Thank you, Mr. Henderson, and thank you, Madame
Merci,
Kuzi.
Monsieur le Président. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses.
To Mr. Van Bynen for 6 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I'll be sharing my time with Mr. Collins. First of all, thank you very much for all the witnesses for coming to contribute to this important study. But I do want to spend some of my time with Statistics Canada. In my riding of Newmarket Aurora, there's a specific interest in the impact of disabilities and the employment inability to acquire employment. So could you please tell the committee what the unemployment rate is for those with disabilities? And could you also specify the numbers based on age and on gender? So, Statistics Canada, whoever wants to run with that. Ms. Bégin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. So what I would like to propose is we can provide additional information based on the labor force survey latest results. We have developed recently and published as well labor market indicators for disability status. And I believe that some of that information could be provided by age. However, the information based on gender is not available at this moment, but would be available later during the year for release.
Okay, thank you. Could you explain the factors based on the information that you do have that contribute towards the rise of unemployment in people with disabilities?
I will turn to my colleague Vincent to see if Vincent has anything to add.
Sure.
Thank you.
Maybe I'll take a step back and explain the data that Madame Bégin just referred to is new data that we've developed in the past several months using the labor force survey, but also additional information that we had collected that allowed us to identify people with disabilities. Traditionally in Canada, we've relied on the Census of Population and the Canadian Disability Survey to measure labor market conditions for people with disabilities. We have enhanced the labor force survey to start to include statistics on people with disabilities. Unfortunately, that data is very fresh, it's very new, and we don't have a trend yet to be able to speak to exactly the longer term or even the medium term or the longer term dynamics. One thing maybe I'll mention is the short analysis that we did publish recently pointed to the very dynamic nature of disability itself. So we saw, for example, an increase in the number of people reporting disabilities in the labor force over the pandemic period, especially people with mental health disabilities. So one of the challenges in responding to your question is that the group of people with disabilities is not a stable group. It, in fact, changes itself. So I would invite you to think of a dynamic situation where disabled people are becoming employed or unemployed, but employed people are also becoming disabled or not disabled. So it's quite challenging to separate those factors, especially at for very specific periods of time or for very specific geographies. Now, having said all that, we will pull together some analysis for you and do the very best we can to respond to your specific question.
Okay. I'd like to shift very quickly from the trailing indicators to leading indicators. During her appearance before the committee on March the 3rd, Leah Nord, of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, called for the federal government to play a leadership role in facilitating, convening, and funding efforts to improve labor market information for analysis purposes for demand-side workforce planning for key professions and sectors in the economy. What kind of labor market information does Statistics Canada currently collect? And to what extent have you been able to engage with businesses to look at the labor force demand management? We'll start with Ms. Bégin.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. As was mentioned earlier by my colleague Vincent, Statistics Canada gathers a variety of indicators on the labor market that we have to look at as a whole to understand the dynamic of the labor market at a specific time in the year. For example, we gather information on the labor market through the census, and as well information on employment insurance benefits, compensation from businesses, as well as vacancies. The survey on vacancies referred to earlier by my colleague is a survey where we have about 100,000 businesses in Canada that participate in it every month and every quarter. So it's a major survey. Your question also had to do with Statistics Canada and their communications with businesses. Over the past few years, Statistics Canada has done a lot of outreach with the Chamber of Commerce, among others, in order to solidify ties, understand issues that businesses are facing, whether it has to do with the labor market, the pandemic, or any other issue they are facing. And on our side, for labor market indicators, we've also participated in those discussions in order to improve our understanding of indicators that would be necessary and relevant for companies to better understand the labor market they are facing.
Yeah, your time is up, Mr. Van Byen, and Mr. Collins is up too. Now to Madame Chabot for 6 minutes. Madame Chabot.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, thank you to all of our witnesses for your testimony and comments today. It's very much appreciated. I have a number of questions for Statistics Canada. Thank you, Ms. Bégin and Mr. Dale. Either one of you may answer. Mr. Dale, I appreciated your remark. It's also a reflection we need to have when we think of vacancies. There's no single explanation to vacancies or the labor shortage, because labor shortages can be structural or organizational for a number of reasons. So even though we have overall statistics the solutions, in our opinion, can't be the same for all sectors. Your research is important. I have a question. During your presentation, Ms. Bégin, because I have your text, in the second paragraph, you say that the number of vacancies in the fourth quarter increased by 80% compared to pre-pandemic levels. You say that that is in most industrial sectors. Do you have a breakdown that you could provide to us when you say 80%? You say 80% overall. When you say industrial sectors, would it be possible to know, do you have that data? Which industrial sectors are you talking about? And do you have a breakdown by province and territory? So, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. Yes, we do have the data. We have it broken down for the provinces and also by industrial sector. So I don't have the information with me today, but Statistics Canada can provide that information, that detailed information after today's meeting by comparing levels we've published recently versus pre-pandemic levels at the beginning of 2020. Thank you. Thank you. I have another question. In your presentation, something that stood out to me is that at the end of 2021, 10% of workers who had a high school diploma or less had recently started jobs that typically require university education. Can you tell us in what area, what sector we've seen that in? In Quebec, in the jobs that need to be filled, when we look at them overall, jobs that require a high level of education are often not filled. Is this a way of meeting that need? So, Mr. Chair, I'll turn to my colleague Vincent, who led that part of the analysis that was published by Statistics Canada. Thank you.
Is somebody following up on Madame Chabot's question?
I'm sorry, I forgot to unmute.
Okay.
And I hope I'm following the right protocol by responding in English on the right channel. So we will have a look at our ability to break down that observation by province and by industrial sector. Often what we do in our analysis is look at national level findings as signals or indications of what's happening in the broader labor market. It's not always possible because of sample sizes to break down those types of observations into smaller groups, but we'll do our best and reply back to the committee with the most detail that we can.
If I may, my question had to do with those who had a high school diploma or less who were in jobs that required a university education. Do we know in what particular areas we find that?
I'm sorry, I don't have that information offhand,
Okay.
and we would have to go back and look at the details of that analysis.
I understand, but it would be possible to obtain that data?
The only constraint on sharing that information with you is the sample size, the number of observations that we have. Beyond that, we'd be happy to give you as much detail as we can.
D'accord.
Okay. One last question, Mr. Chair. The higher proportion of Black and Filipino persons among care workers. Here again, would it be possible to have more information, to have it broken down when we talk about care workers, it'd be good to know exactly what we're talking about. There are a number of different titles in Quebec. We talk about personal support workers who are qualified. Does that mean there are Black and Filipino people who are in types of fields that don't require qualifications? Could we have more information in writing on that, please?
Witness to provide that information to the committee in writing. It's a detailed question. Deserves a detailed answer. So could you follow up detail to the committee? Now to Madame Zerillo for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And can you just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay? Great. Okay. So I wanted to go to, thank you for all of the witnesses today. I wanted to go to Ms. Lightman around her research, really exposing the exploitation and the discrimination that happens in personal support workers and long-term care. And I wanted to ask a few more questions or hear more about the challenges that these workers find themselves in. You mentioned that many have credentials, but they are not able to realize work that accepts those credentials. So if I could have a little bit more information into the challenges for having credentials recognized and the limitations, what keeps them in these precarious jobs.
Thank you to the member for their question. As stated, we know that there is vast overqualification of immigrant women working as personal support workers in long-term care. Some figures estimate as many as 44% of caregivers worked as nurses prior to migrating to Canada. And according to a Statistics Canada report, 67% of nursing graduates from the Philippines are considered to be overqualified for their current jobs. So based on the research that I've done, trying to unpack this labor market mismatch, we know that the process of transferring credentials needs to be accelerated. It needs to be faster, it needs to be easier, and it needs to be more affordable. Many of these women are sending remittances to their home countries, are working multiple part-time jobs to make ends meet, are supporting families, and the current process does not allow them with the time or the financial means to go about upgrading their skills. And this leads to quantifiable downward labor market mobility relative to other workers, as well as being stuck in precarious working conditions. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in terms of reducing the barriers that these women experience to working in the jobs for which they were trained in their home countries.
Thank you, Ms. Lightman. And I also wanted to just touch on the points you made around systematic exclusion from decision-making and also this lack of mental health support. So I just really wanted to understand, are there any type of supports for these women and these workers that have precarious immigration status as well? They're tied to these jobs, but do they have the ability to speak out, or is there repercussions? Like, is there fear of repercussions of speaking out based on the precarious nature of their work? And even as it relies on mental health support or family support that isn't available to them, are they concerned about their loss of status or work by speaking out?
Absolutely. So I think the intersection of precarious work and precarious immigration status leads to highly vulnerable working conditions for these women. And the pandemic has really exacerbated the physical and mental health challenges of these jobs. The women I spoke to talked about increasing demands on the job due to the pandemic, heightened levels of stress tied to fears of becoming personally infected with the virus or fears of infecting their family and their children, and overwhelming feelings of loss and helplessness as a result of watching long-term care residents die of COVID-19 in large numbers. So many of the jobs that they're working on do not have supplementary health insurance, meaning that they're often having to pay out of their own pockets for any physical or mental health supports that they need on top of basic services. And this, especially for these jobs that we know are very much on the front line and that we see as being essential services, and we sort of valorize in the language that we use, there's a need for more structural physical and mental health supports. These are also very physically demanding jobs. To speak to the second part of your question in terms of, sorry, can you remind me, you said we're speaking of mental health, and what was the other component?
Just of they couldn't speak out because they could lose they're tied to a job. Their immigration status is tied to a job, and if they speak out, they lose the job, they lose their status.
Right. So that's certainly true for those that are waiting for permanent residency through the caregiver program, but also even just for those that do have permanent resident status. There's a very top-down decision-making structure within many healthcare institutions, and those that are personal support workers or healthcare aides, certainly from the research that I've done, do not feel they're in a place to speak out in terms of their thoughts about what could make the system work better. Certainly those in publicly funded and unionized work environments felt more free to speak up, but the overwhelming trends that I saw was of workers that felt that, even as they saw institutional mismanagement, not enough PPE, very low staff to resident ratios, they had limited voice to speak up. So I think that's a space where we need to really include their voices in decision-making processes going forward as we rethink our long-term care institutions in light of the COVID-19 pandemic.
A short question and a short answer, Madame Zarrillo.
Okay, so question, thank you for that. Question for StatsCan then. There's a saying that you can't improve what you don't measure. And I note that the Ms. Nord from the Chamber of Commerce said that, I quote from testimony, "I can tell you that the age distribution of the construction workforce, I can tell you how many women, Indigenous people, and new Canadians work in the trade. I can even break these numbers down by jurisdiction, but they can't do the same." Not quoting now, but the same can't be said for the care economy. So my question to StatsCan is, why don't we capture this over-indexed women's work? And is there plans in place to start measuring the care economy in a greater and more granular way?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the...
If the answer could be provided in writing to the committee, it would be appreciated. The time has gone well over.
We
Mr.
can do
Ruff?
that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ruff, for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Chair, and my thanks to the witnesses for coming. As a bit of a preamble, when responding, I represent a very rural riding and likely the second oldest demographic or riding in Ontario, so just try to keep that in mind in response, please. My first question will likely be to Polytechnics Canada, and it's around the dashboard you suggested. Who are you suggesting is responsible for that at the federal level?
I think there's a variety of organizations that we would be well positioned, Statistics Canada being one of them. I think that the notion of the point is that there's a lot of awesome work being done in data collection with respect to whether it's the Labour Market Information Council, Statistics Canada, Future Skills Center, industry associations, sector councils, et cetera, et cetera. I think that maybe there just needs to be some alignment to take otherwise fragmented systems and kind of put them together, align the methodology so we're able to make these comparisons over a longer time horizon. But certainly one of kind of the national bodies that are kind of overseeing some of this work would be well positioned to lead the effort. Thank you.
Just to expand on that a bit, one of the challenges much of rural Canada has is lack of access to internet. And as we go more digital, and considering as well just the challenges for people to access and go through this, can you just expand a bit on the importance of having internet access right across this country?
It's an excellent point, and that's why that as we make gains in the navigation to lifelong learning, it obviously needs to be complemented as well by an equal commitment to broadband across the country to ensure that as we're developing digital services, that we're not just exacerbating existing inequalities, and that as we're increasing the navigation to lifelong learning, that those living coast to coast to coast in Canada are able to access it as well. So the point being that it needs to be complemented by gains in making internet more widely available across the country so that folks would be able to access such a platform as we're suggesting.
I think this next question should likely best, it's a bit of a change and direction. But in Ontario this past year, and I know we're delving into a little bit of provincial jurisdiction, but they've reintroduced a nursing education program, which I think is going to be essential to helping fill some of these labor shortages in long-term care homes, PSWs, and getting more people trained easier, but more importantly, retaining them in where those college locations are in our home areas. Could you just expand on, is this the type of program that maybe more provinces and the federal government could take a role in sort of providing some guidance and support to?
Certainly, without getting into the challenges of the federalism, the federalist nature of the country, 100% looking for best practices in some of these provincial programs that have been stood up throughout the pandemic to expedite the transition from education to employment, I think would help to mitigate some of the labor gaps. The second point that you raised, though, is as our CEO Sarah Watts-Reiner had indicated during her remarks, post-secondary infrastructure being a big piece to ensure that we're providing the education and training that is very much industry aligned, so that students are learning on the equipment that is used in the workplace. And so a part of that is really increasing the simulation capacity of education and training, which would then in turn also increase access to ensure. So for example, Conestoga College in Kitchener, Ontario has a centralized location where they're able to lead the training to folks that are working in rural communities through video conferencing and other software. So as we're able to, again, get broadband more accessible across the country, the ability to use simulated learning to expand the access to education and training, I think is an important step in addition. Thank you.
Totally agree, and again, it goes back to my earlier point about rural Canada and the importance for the federal government to focus, I think, on rural Canada even more so, where you can't move forward on some of this without it. My final quick question will be to Stats Canada, and it's really, can you expand a bit on part-time versus full-time unemployment rates, and is there a difference between rural and urban areas? Thanks.
I can respond to that question. We'd be happy to provide you with that information. I don't have the details at hand, but we can easily provide that information.
Thank you, Mr. Ruff. Now to Mr. Collins to finish up the first panel for 5 minutes.
Yep. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And my questions will be to start to Stats Canada. As noted in the opening, we continue to see strong economic growth across the country and in all provinces and territories. And the recent labor force survey noted that we gained approximately 337,000 jobs, dropping our unemployment rate to 5.5%, I think, as was noted in Ms. Béjean's opening, much lower than the pre-pandemic numbers of 2020, where the rate was 5.5%. So can you verify the numbers as it relates to the unemployment rate, and can you provide us a snapshot of where we've made gains, as in what sectors, and how do our numbers compare to our neighbors south of the border?
So, Mr. Chair, Statistics Canada could provide additional information in writing. In terms of industries, in terms of provinces, and we also do from time to time some analysis compare with the United States. So we would be happy to provide that information.
Okay. Do you have this morning information as it relates to sectors in terms of where we've made the strongest gains as it relates to employment growth?
I don't have that information with me. I can turn to my colleague Vincent just to see if he has any additional information.
Thank you.
So to partially address your point, so there are some sectors, for example, or some sectors, for example, professional, scientific, and technical services, the industry category that includes the tech sector, has shown a significant employment increase compared to pre-pandemic levels. There are a few others, but I would want to verify. Healthcare employment is up compared to pre-COVID levels, not surprisingly. In industries like accommodation and food and recreation, industries that are very affected by public health shutdowns, employment in those sectors is not yet back to pre-pandemic levels. So we can go through the data and give you a comprehensive response.
Okay.
But in general, it's true to say that some industries have experienced substantial growth compared to pre-pandemic levels, and others have not yet recovered.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Dale. I was pleasantly surprised to see strong gains in the construction area. As you know, Mr. Chair, our government is very anxious to see increased housing supply, more units constructed to assist with the affordability issue. And so I noticed in the report that the construction sector experienced some good gains. Do we traditionally see seasonal bumps in this sector? And if so, are these gains comparable to what we would have experienced prior to the pandemic?
So I can respond to that. The data that we report in the labor force survey released every month is what we call seasonally adjusted. So you can, in other words, we've taken steps to remove the impact of seasonality. So when we say that employment in that sector is higher than pre-COVID levels, you can take that as being in addition to any seasonal effects. I will note that construction is interesting in the sense that both employment, while employment has exceeded pre-COVID levels, it's also one of the sectors with quite a large increase in job vacancies. So in other words, the total labor demand, both met and unmet, is substantially higher than pre-COVID levels. And you can think of investments in infrastructure and other factors driving construction activity as being responsible for that increase in overall labor demand.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Dale. I noticed with the, if I use the 37,000 jobs that were created, you highlight there that they're monitored, you monitor that through building permits in terms of the activity. And I know coming from the municipal sector that the value of the permits is an important indicator to look at. But in terms of sheer number of permits, is that tracked as well? And then do you break that down by commercial, residential, industrial, and institutional, much like municipalities would?
So I don't have those details at hand. Those are other colleagues in Stats Canada responsible for the building permit data, but we'd be very happy to dig up that information and report back to you.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Collins, that concludes the first group of witnesses. I want to thank you for appearing and would ask all the witnesses, their questions were quite technical this morning, and if you could follow up to the committee with the information they requested, it would be great. I know it's tough trying to put it in 6 minutes when you're dealing with that type of detail. So thank you for appearing, and please submit any additional information that you feel is relevant to the committee in writing. It'd be most appreciated. With that, we'll suspend for 2 minutes while we transition to the next group of witnesses. Thank you. We'll resume with the second grouping of witnesses. We have from the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence, James Geniro. If I get it wrong, please correct me. Canadian Medical Association, Catherine Smart. And from the Canadian Nurses Association, Michael Villeneuve, Chief Executive Officer. We will start with the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence for 5 minutes, and I would ask the witnesses to please keep your comments within 5 because the committee members have an extensive list of questions. You may
Wonderful.
begin.
Thank you for the opportunity to present. My name is James Gennaro, and I'm here on behalf of the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence. We are a new organization powered by the Azrieli Foundation and will launch in May. We believe that caregiving is the next frontier of public policy in Canada, and our mission is to support and empower caregivers and care providers, advance the knowledge and capacity of the caregiving field, and advocate for effective and visionary social policy, all with a disability-informed lens. Like many sectors of the economy, the profession of paid caregiving is plagued by systemic issues that have been laid bare by the pandemic. Low wages, unstable work arrangements, unpredictable hours, and insufficient training have all been exposed in many areas of the caregiving economy. This sector is comprised of many racialized and newcomer workers, most of whom are women. We have all heard of the working conditions and staff shortages in long-term care and the impact that has had on seniors across the country. In the developmental services sector, many staff supporting children and adults with intellectual disabilities work for more than one employer to make ends meet or rely on gig work to supplement their wages, while both full and part-time employment opportunities go unfulfilled for months. The same is true of home care staff who provide life-saving care to vulnerable people living in their homes. We must do better to support paid caregivers in their work. In doing so, we can make the profession of caregiving more attractive and help address long-term labor shortages across all areas of the economy. After all, paid caregiving is a job, and workers deserve to be paid an adequate wage. Unfortunately, wages in the caregiving sector are simply insufficient to draw staff into the profession and keep them in the field. The home and community care sector in Ontario is one example where insufficient investment in wages has created a labor shortage. Frontline staff in this sector are the lowest paid of the entire healthcare system in Ontario. Over the past decade, provincial budgets have created new capacity while freezing base budgets. Consequently, many providers are providing services at funding rates that are vastly out of date and do not reflect increases in the real cost of operations. It has become increasingly difficult to attract and retain staff, which impacts the quality of life of clients living at home and ultimately puts even more stress on our healthcare system. As the federal government contemplates the twin challenges of labor shortages in caregiving and pressures on our healthcare system, we submit that federal healthcare funding tied to increasing both capacity and base wages in the home and community care sector across the country would result in higher wages, improved recruitment and retention, improved quality of care, and ultimately less pressure on emergency rooms. As we begin to repair our economy, we recommend that your study also consider the bigger picture of caregiving. All caregiving sectors are experiencing labor shortages, which in turn creates other labor shortages across the entirety of the economy. In 2018, Canada needed it. A study published in 2013 projected that over half of all Canadians will provide unpaid care at some point in their lives to a friend or family member in need. This care is disproportionately delivered by women. Out of necessity, many caregivers need to partially or fully withdraw from the labor market to care for their loved ones, which further contributes to labor shortages across the country, as these potential workers turned caregivers cannot work full-time for want of available paid caregiver support. In effect, this further shrinks the number of working-age adults who can fill jobs. This dynamic was estimated to cost upwards of $1.3 billion in lost productivity per year. It drives down incomes and contributes to the gender wage gap. As you prepare the study on labor shortages and caregiving, we urge you to consider the many negative effects of underfunding and low wages in paid caregiving. Addressing this issue would improve the quality of life for millions of vulnerable people who need care, including seniors able to live at home longer thanks to high-quality home and community care services provided by personal support workers. It would create new automation-proof jobs in the predominantly female, racialized, and newcomer caregiving economy, and reactivate many unpaid caregivers who could rejoin the workforce when their loved ones' care needs are met. Caregiving can be a rewarding career and sustain a good quality of life if properly supported and compensated. Thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to your questions.
Mr. Gennaro? Thank you.
Gennaro.
Gennaro, thank you. Madame Smart for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair and committee members, for the opportunity to appear before you today. I'm Dr. Catherine Smart, and I'm speaking today from Ottawa on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nations. I'm a pediatrician based in the Yukon. As president of the Canadian Medical Association, it's an honor to represent physicians and medical learners from all jurisdictions. Every one of us have felt the impacts of a healthcare system stretched beyond its capacity. For health workers, the pandemic has been unrelenting. 2 years in, organizations representing health workers across the country are sounding the alarm. Canada's healthcare system is collapsing. As the national organization representing physicians, we too are calling for action. Over 50% of physicians and medical learners reported high levels of burnout, 30% in pre-pandemic levels. Moreover, nearly half of physicians reported that they would likely reduce clinical hours. The shortage of colleagues to cope with current and future demands is nationwide. As many Canadians are feeling that the loosening of health measures are signaling an emergence from the pandemic, the same cannot be said for health workers. Our health workforce is in the biggest crisis we've ever seen. And because of it, Canada's health system is on life support. There's no grateful for the federal government's integral role in the pandemic response, but it's not over. Healthcare workers are relying on the leadership of the federal government to support a way forward. By aiding medical professionals, you are helping every Canadian, now and in the future. Last fall, the CMA and the Canadian Nurses Association co-hosted an emergency summit to learn from nearly 40 health organizations representing nurses, physicians, respiratory therapists, personal support workers, psychologists, and educational institutions. We knew then that we are collectively experiencing a human health resources, or HHR, crisis. We recently met again with close to 40 organizations representing health workers. What we heard is disheartening. Health workers are depleted and distressed. They're facing harassment and leaving their careers and professions entirely. The repercussions of this could be devastating in a country where already more than 5 million Canadians presently have no regular healthcare provider. Of those with a doctor, only 40% of patients could get an appointment within 48 hours. And 46% of Canadians of physicians are considering reducing clinical hours over the next 2 years. What we're learning is more than alarming. It's potentially catastrophic. Time is of the essence. More than a quarter of practicing physicians claim low rates of overall mental health. Recent figures show that 20% of frontline healthcare workers have thought about suicide. A crushing 6% have planned an attempt. To worsen matters, the barriers we've created over time for doctors and nurses practicing in a new province or territory isn't helping to fill the 118,000 job vacancies in healthcare and social assistance across the country. It is why the current regulatory licensing frameworks need to move to a pan-Canadian licensure model. This would allow health professionals to work where they would like and where the needs are greatest. It's time to remove these unnecessary regulatory obstacles. The result will affect every single Canadian and put their health or their ability to access their health system at risk. This crisis has ballooned past what any jurisdiction can manage alone. We know that the premiers are focused on an increase in unconditional federal dollars. We believe that more strategic federal investments are required to support rebuilding healthcare delivery in Canada. First, we need federal leadership for a pan-Canadian integrated health human resource planning. An intergovernmental approach led by the federal government is required. Second, it's time to deliver on the promise to increase patient access to family doctors and primary care teams by delivering on the $3.2 billion commitment. As part of this commitment, the CMA recommends that $2 billion over 4 years be dedicated to a primary care access fund and $2 million to undertake an assessment of interprofessional training capacity of family physicians. Scaling up collaborative interprofessional primary care is central to increasing access to care. Third, we need a pan-Canadian licensure model that supports access to care, especially for rural and remote communities, continuity of care, including cross-border virtual care, the mobility of patients and providers, and overall creates a more streamlined licensure process. The past decades have witnessed remarkable advances in medicine, but we're still reliant on health workers. And just as we have stood on the front lines, it's critical that the federal government create pathways that will stand for the protection of medical professionals. We need the federal government to finish this long shift with us. Thank you, Chair.
Now to Mr. Villeneuve for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, for inviting the Canadian Nurses Association, which is the national and global professional voice of Canadian nursing, to appear today. My name is Mike Villeneuve, and I'm speaking to you today from the traditional lands of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of CNA. Mr. Chair, I've been working in healthcare for the past 44 years. I've never seen the gravity of the kinds of now. CNA predicted that Canada would be short about 60,000 nurses by 2022, and we're a quarter of the way into that now, and the shortages are worse than we imagined. Canada's nearly 450,000 nurses, 91% of whom are women, are the backbone of our health systems. And today they're completely exhausted, demoralized, and we're seeing alarming numbers of them not just leaving their jobs, but even the profession. Many nurses face working 16-hour shifts, or they've not been able to take a day off or a break, or they have their vacation suspended, and they face chronic and dangerous understaffing. Rates of severe burnout among healthcare workers have almost doubled, and you heard what Dr. Smart said about the number of people who have planned an attempt at suicide. 6%. It's alarming. Vacancies for registered nurses and registered psychiatric nurses have increased by over 85%, the largest of all occupations. Nurses have been sounding the alarm for decades about these problems, and long before COVID-19. The issues are not new, but they've been exacerbated by the pandemic. The factors influencing nurse retention have been studied intensively for 40 years through myriad studies, reports, and millions of dollars in research. Nurses have a clear understanding of the problems, and we know the solutions needed to stabilize Canada's health workforce crisis. The challenge is creating and sustaining political will at all levels to implement these tough changes. Canada needs targeted federal funding to help healthcare systems train, retain, recruit, improve education and working conditions for healthcare workers. The federal government has an important convener and coordinating role to play and needs to work together with provinces and territories on both short and long-term strategies. Maintaining the status quo just cannot be an option. In the short term, we need retention incentives for nurses and healthcare workers to stay in their jobs, such as retention bonuses, student debt forgiveness, tax incentives. Additional funding is also needed to help optimize workloads for healthcare workers. This could include increasing administrative help, cleaning, other support staff in nursing settings to unlock more time for care. In the longer term, Canada echoes the calls for a national health workforce body to collect high quality data to support a strong, modern, pan-Canadian health human resources strategy that includes planning at the provincial, territorial, and national levels. CNA also recommends increasing the number of seats in schools of nursing and greater capacity for clinical placements. We recommend expediting the process for recognizing internationally educated nurses and funding for mental health supports for healthcare workers. We need emergency and definitive interventions with immediate action and a multifaceted strategy to address the complex problems in Canada's health workforce. And we have to be bold and creative. Strategies that serve to retain a nurse at 25 are not going to be the same as what will retain a nurse at 65. And what attracts people to stay in home care may be very different from critical care or palliative care. So we need to be nimble, marshal the evidence, and develop a toolbox of strategies that can be adapted across care settings and across career stages. Finally, as the proportion of older adults in Canada rises, we will need a strong care economy and workforce to support our aging population into the future. In conclusion, we applaud the committee's decision to conduct this important and timely study, and I'd be happy to try to answer any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Villeneuve, we will now open the floor to questions, beginning with Madame Gladue for 6 minutes. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses for being here today and for all the work that you've done. I'm going to start with Mr. Villeneuve, talking about nurses. My daughter is a nurse. I'm certainly well aware of many of the issues facing nurses. She's been attacked. She has been forced to work overtime. She has had her vacation suspended. And even though she's only in her 20s, she is one of those considering leaving the profession. And so I guess if we look at all of these issues, why have they not been addressed? They've been known for a long time, but there seems to be nothing done. Is it lack of money? What is the lack of political will? What do you think?
Well, thank you, Chair, for the question. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because we've been looking at these issues. I can tell you I've been involved in this since the year 2000. And at that time, the federal government, the Conference of Deputy Ministers directed the country to develop a nursing strategy for Canada to address the shortages and these ongoing issues. And I can share with the member chair that I looked at it again this morning, published in 2000, if you want to look it up. The Nursing Strategy for Canada had a number of recommendations, and its first recommendation was to create a Canadian Nursing Advisory Committee to talk about all these issues. I happen to have the honor of being the executive lead of that. Again, I looked at those 51 recommendations, and hand to God, you could just change the date on both of those reports, and literally every single thing we're talking about today is exactly the same. So there just has not been the will to make the kind of changes that we need across the system. Frustratingly, some places do it very, very well. So one might ask, why don't all the rest? There are many hospitals in this country who don't have any trouble recruiting people and retaining them. So, and I say, don't even invent anything new. Just copy that and do it in other places. We know the kinds of solutions. So it's been a tremendous frustration, Chair, that we haven't seemed to be able to move the dial. And I won't go into the rabbit hole of gender, but I am very, very concerned that this is not the case in workforces heavily dominated by men. And I've watched it play out for almost 45 years.
Thank you very much. I fully agree. And I'm increasingly concerned when I see that we have an aging demographic and an increase in dementia, which is only going to exacerbate, I think, the already difficult situation. Question for Mr. Gennaro. Do you have any information about the percentage of PSWs who are not full-time? We see that people chronically make them take 2 and 3 jobs part-time with no benefits, but is there a quantity that you could put to that?
Thank you for your question. It's an excellent question. I don't have that data off the top of my head, but I can certainly get it back to you. I can say, though, that there has been an interesting development over the course of the COVID-19 pandemic, and I'm speaking specifically about the Ontario experience with COVID, but this was replicated in other provinces, that as the realities of COVID became clear and it became obvious that staff working for more than one employer was a vector for transmission of the disease. A number of agencies, both in the PSW sector, but also in developmental services and other caregiving sectors, started to move people purposely from part-time to full-time employment by offering them the opportunity to go from being a part-time employee to a full-time employee, certainly with predictable hours, but often with benefits and access to pensions and stuff like that. And I'll say, speaking in Ontario at least, there was a lot of interest among those part-time staff to go to full-time employment, given the option. And even as the orders enabling all of that stuff have started to recede in Ontario, the interest in staying on as full-time employees rather than going back to part-time is huge. And I would say is probably the vast majority.
That's the direction we need for sure. Dr. Smart, we heard testimony the other day from Linda Silas about the nurses, that they lost about 8% of them who lost their jobs because they weren't vaccinated. And that just, made the situation even worse when there was already a shortage of nurses. With respect to doctors in this country, did we see something similar? I've heard anecdotally at my office about different things, doctors that decided that they were going to shut their offices, doctors that, shut their offices because they felt their conscience rights were being, threatened, and people having their licenses threatened. I mean, I hear these things anecdotally, but really from a labor shortage, was there an impact from the pandemic on the medical staff?
I don't think we've seen a really significant impact that way amongst physicians. Over 99% of physicians are fully vaccinated against COVID-19 across the country. So certainly we've heard a case here or there, but I don't think we've seen a substantial impact on the workplace. I think what we have seen is other impacts, of course, from the pandemic. Many people in the community trying to provide primary care, having to pivot totally to virtual health on a very short timeline, and then try to maintain access for their patients over the past 2 years with changing public health requirements. That's been very stressful. And it's one of the things that was noted in our National Physician Health Survey as contributing to burnout, was just the constant need to adjust to new expectations and ongoing and crushing workloads.
And what would be the biggest barriers to getting more doctors in Canada, which is clearly what we need? Is it credential recognition? Is it, financial donations from the federal government? What is the barrier?
I think one of our biggest challenges is without a human health resource plan, we've actually never defined clearly how many physicians are needed to serve Canadians on different levels of medicine. So, for example, we know we need people in primary care. Well, what's that exact number? We know we need specialist care. What's that exact number? And where should these physicians be located? So without that pan-Canadian human health resource plan, it's then challenging to start back at the beginning of the medical school level. How many people should we be training? Postgraduate level, how many people should we then be training in these different specialties of medicine, and which types and where? So right now, I think that the issue is none of this is integrated, and that's very challenging, and it means that we have these shortages. The other piece is we do have international trained medical graduates in Canada who have been unable to access the system. So they remain uncredentialed, unlicensed, and they haven't been able to participate in the systems that exist to get into actual practice and caring for Canadians. So there's also work that could be done there to bring more of those folks on board and into our system.
Very good. Thanks so much.
Now to Mr. Long for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon to my colleagues. Thank you to the witnesses for your testimony. I'm a member of Parliament for the Great Riding of St. John Rossay, and last week I had an opportunity to sit down with Dr. John Dornan, who's the CEO of Horizon Health. Very innovative ideas we talked about. But also, out of that meeting came a lot of concern, obviously. I mean, we're here, and again, I thank MP Zarillo for this wonderful study. But we're here today because we certainly are faced with a crisis in the care community, care economy, doctors, nurses, caregivers in every sector. And, from a federal perspective, I guess, as an individual, as an MP, as a federal politician, as a federal government, I look for answers as to what we can do, and we certainly recognize jurisdiction is a major issue when it comes to our involvement in healthcare matters. My first question is for you, Dr. Smart, and certainly you alluded to the fact about the $28 billion ask from the provinces for healthcare, but you also mentioned it may be better served, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it may be better served targeted. Can you just elaborate on what you mean by targeted investments?
I think what we see is that there are certain areas right now within the health system that are particularly in crisis, and we believe that targeted investments that then ensure that those funds go to supporting those areas have more opportunity to create accountability in the system and outcomes for Canadians versus large sums of money being absorbed into a general budget. So, for example, surgical backlogs and diagnostic imaging. We know there's hundreds of thousands of Canadians waiting for those procedures. So targeted funding that's there, that's been earmarked for hospitals rules to make sure that those services are provided would benefit those Canadians directly. We know that there's significant issues with mental health, and that's worsened for Canadians throughout the pandemic. So again, funds that can be targeted towards that will ensure that Canadians have better access to more holistic and more extensive mental health supports. We're talking about primary care. Again, this is a huge crisis. Over 5 million Canadians without access to a primary care provider. This is the front door to our healthcare system. So when you have Canadians without access to that type of care, it's very problematic, and it increases costs over the long term as many chronic disease remain unmanaged and patients bounce between intermittent types of care. So targeted investments in terms of increasing integrated team-based care, we think again can go to creating those better outcomes for Canadians. So that's why we're recommending that the federal government, in alignment with stakeholders, identify those priorities and ensure that the funds go to meeting those goals.
Sorry, thanks for that answer. And also, I had a meeting with Dr. Michael Barry, who's past president of the CMA. And how severe do you think the shortages in infrastructure or an issue is with infrastructure? Certainly he talked about diagnostic imaging equipment. What level of concern do you have with this the age of the infrastructure?
I think that that's going to be variable across the country and across communities for sure in terms of things that need to be replaced. And we see that both with diagnostic imaging equipment. We also see that with surgical equipment and really hospital equipment. And I think you're going to see that different jurisdictions have different challenges. I think the other big infrastructure issue we have is the infrastructure for providing primary care. In our traditional model of fee-for-service medicine, that infrastructure is provided and funded largely by physicians. And that's becoming more challenging with rising labor and rent costs. And a lot of physicians are challenged to open and maintain primary care clinics because of the cost associated, as well as the ability to staff those particular forms of infrastructure. So I think there's challenges in that domain, absolutely.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Mr. Villeneuve, thanks for your testimony. Again, recognizing jurisdiction between federal and provincial governments, how do you think that we as a federal government can help provinces and territories when it comes to staffing shortages? I mean, obviously there's not a nurse, sadly, MP Gladew's daughter, any nurse that I talk to is just severely overworked. And, the mental health crisis, I think, in our nursing sector is something of major concern. But what can we do as a federal government, Mr. Villeneuve?
Thank you for the question, Chair. One of the realities across the country is, we just look at nursing, there's roughly 450,000 nurses. We have a terrible shortage of nursing care. I'm never sure if we have a shortage of nurses. In many places, half of those people are part-time. So what are the kinds of things you could do, even if you took a chunk of them and moved them to full-time hours? Many people who are internationally educated graduates in the country not getting into the system as quickly as they could. So what do you do to move people in and retain them? The people who are in the system are telling us, Mr. Chair, that the reason that they're going is not because of money or retention bonuses, it's staffing. So if the federal government can make some effort, we had suggested a $300 million package to support better staffing by simply using some incentives that the government can do, such as tax forgiveness, for example. If I'm 25 and you said to me, if you'll stay for 5 years, we'll wipe your student debt clean, that would get my attention. And if I'm 65 and you say, stay for 3 more years and we'll forgive the first 25% of your income, some creative levers that the federal government could do, that would be attention getting for people. And the nurses are telling us, for example, late in career, Chair, they're making pretty good money. $5,000 doesn't attract someone who's in the $80,000 to $100,000 category to stay in terrible working conditions. So what do you do to keep as many people in the system as possible? And we think the strong funding support of the federal government, plus convening some planning, and the federal government is good at doing that, would go a long way to shoring up the resources in the nursing sector.
Thank you very much.
Madame Chabot, vous la parole.
Ms. Chabot, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses. At the outset, I'll say I think the situation you're describing with the Canadian Medical Association and the Canadian Nurses Association, I think overall we can observe that on the ground there are labor shortages that vary from one province to another for different reasons, but there's an overall phenomenon. There's burnout. There's also challenges in attracting and retaining people. And as you've said, it's not the same strategy that will work in every sector. The challenge I see, not in what you've said, I think you draw a good picture of what we can see, but you know very well that concrete solutions belong to each of the provinces. In Quebec, well, I was a nurse. I represented nurses at the union level for a long time, and in each province, major nurses' unions, the medical associations for family physicians and specialists negotiate the conditions of work in the areas that affect them. So we can't have the same approach for vacancies, for full-time positions. The federal government can't have a single approach. It's not its field of expertise. This would more properly belong to the provinces. So where I will agree with you is that the federal government needs to invest significantly in our public health care system and our social services, because that's what Canadian law says, that we need to have universal free services, and we need to have the capacity to have the tools to meet the challenges you're describing. So this cannot be done with conditions. Quebec and the provinces have been calling for this. We were at 22% for the federal contribution to health care. And if nothing is done, it will be 18% in 5 years. So that balance needs to be restored to have the federal contribution to health care. Its share has been decreasing. From that 50-50, we're now at 22%. And there's been no commitment. They've said they're giving money for X, but it's not predictable, it's not ongoing. So do you agree with me that the best thing to do is to provide funding without condition at a level of at least 35% of healthcare spending that will support staff and workers? That's my question. Thank you.
Chair, is that question for me, excuse me, or Dr. Smart?
The witnesses want to respond?
Whoever would like to.
She did not direct it to anybody particular. Mr. Villeneuve, and then
Chair, yes, I'll just make a very quick comment that CNA does not have an official position on the percentage, the federal provincial split, but I think it would be safe to say that we would support a return to a better balance for the provinces and territories. But I think we would also say that return of a higher percent federally being paid, in a sense unconditionally, can also be accompanied, as it has been in the past, in accords. And I know FPT health accords chills the blood in some people, but they worked in some places to buy change. So I don't see that it has to be one or the other. Rather, could you have both? Thank you, Chair.
I can also comment, we certainly support and recognize that there's a need for the Canadian healthcare transfer dollars to increase as well, and that predictability and sustainability of funding is important. However, we do also support the idea of targeted funding for the reasons I mentioned earlier, which is to improve collaboration at the federal and provincial levels, to allow us to scale up things that are working in different parts of the country into other parts of the country, and to create accountability in terms of where those dollars are going to make sure that they're actually achieving the outcomes that Canadians want to see in the system.
And Mr. Chair, if I could also add, certainly the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence hasn't weighed in on this particular issue quite yet, but I will say that similar to Monsieur Villeneuve talking about the federal spending power buying change in the system, our submission is that the core issue among paid caregiving is wages, and it's difficult to address wages without some conditionality, some strings, however you'd like to put it, from the federal government as these funds transfer to make sure that that particular problem is addressed, which has knock-on consequences on the overall quality of the system. Thank you.
Just 20 seconds, Madame Shabat.
Sur la question des salaires.
Regarding wages, I think each provinces with its labor policies and laws needs to address that. In Quebec, there's been a pay equity law for 25 years, so I don't think that's a federal matter.
We've run out of time. If there's somebody who wants to respond in writing to that, they can. We will now move to Madame Zerillo for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's certainly been wonderful to hear from the witnesses today and the last few meetings where we've heard from witnesses. And I think what's clear, and one of the reasons that I was motivated to want to see this study happen is, there is systematic and systemic gender discrimination, and also discrimination for immigrant women more so than others. But I mean, this is the root of the problem, and we have an opportunity to expose it here in this study and to make conditions better for those working in the care economy, and also to elevate the reality that this is part of the economy and actually underpins every other part of the economy. So I really, really appreciate the comments today. So my first question is for Dr. Smart, just around this, the asking that has happened, and that the federal government hasn't necessarily been listening. So I just wanted to understand if there are any thoughts or any conversations around why your organization might feel that the federal government hasn't been listening.
I think right now where we find ourselves is I think we do feel that people are listening and hearing our concerns, and we certainly appreciate the opportunity to present to you today and at other parliamentary committees, as well as in other contexts. I think the concern and the challenge that you're hearing from all of us is how we move from laying these problems out to the actions and solutions to solve them. So I think, as Mr. Villeneuve said, these are not necessarily new issues. We've been talking about the same things now for a long time. The same issues keep coming up. The pandemic, I think, if anything, has made the issues more acute. It's brought them more to the awareness of the average Canadian at home who's been hearing about this every day. And I think the challenges our organizations are finding is how do we move from having our concerns heard and the opportunity to share what we're finding and learning on the ground, actual help us solve these problems. And I think where we find ourselves today is we really need to move to action. And our concern, I believe, is that if we stay with the status quo, we're very close to having Canadians not be able to access care at all in different contexts. And I think that's extremely worrisome for the future.
Thank you so much. And I agree. And just on that topic of actions and solutions, my next question is for Mr. Villeneuve, and just around the studies that he referenced, done back in the early 2000s. I wonder if we could, Mr. Chair, have those studies come to the floor and be part of the information for the analysts. But I did want to ask Mr. Villeneuve, how do we make these studies, these insights, this information actionable? What needs to happen?
Well, I think we're actually at a strange point of opportunity, Mr. Chair, just because of COVID-19. So we've talked about this, as I said, for 20 years and more. We predicted the shortage of 60,000 this year, and here we are. But COVID has sort of accelerated what would have been a more protracted period of retirements of older nurses. And I can tell you, for example, in my time serving as a patient care manager at Sunnybrook in Toronto, in the areas of neuro ICU and neurosurgery and so on, you could often find ways to sort of make conditions a little easier for older nurses, reduce their hours, give them different jobs and so on to keep them longer. So we've had this compressed, and they're now saying, I'm not going to do that anymore. So I think what I would say to the member is I feel for the first time, actually a long time, we are hearing people. Listen, I feel people are hearing us. And I think that the crisis at points of care For example, Toronto area's 905 area hospital, I won't mention. Staffing is all set up for next week. This is a couple of months ago. Come in Monday morning, 25% of the nurses are off. 25%. So when you become at material risk of not being able to actually run an organization, it gets people's attention. So I think that I'm not giving a very good answer to the member, but I have hope that the emergency nature of it now will propel us forward into some actual action, because the solutions aren't new. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I agree with you that the critical nature of it is forcing a response. So hopefully you can do a little bit more planning as well as respond to the critical. I want to go back to Dr. Smart just around, I mean, I hear over years, I'm talking decade at least, that, you know, it's the provincial professional organizations that limit the amount of doctors that can come through, you know, the limit on healthcare workers. So I'm just wondering if there is any truth to that the professional organizations in healthcare are limiting the ability for seats to happen in universities to get people graduated and to get these foreign credentials recognized.
Thank you for the question, Chair. What I would say is I think in the past there has been some limitations at the government level in terms of restricting billing numbers for physicians in order to try to direct the health workforce into certain locations. To my knowledge, I don't believe that we see the provincial and territorial medical associations at all limiting numbers of training spots either at medical school or at the postgraduate level. What we do have is a lack of coordination between the outputs that we're trying to achieve in terms of practicing physicians, both in primary care specialties as well as other specialty areas and postgraduate training opportunities. Again, this speaks to the issue also around credentialing and licensing, and this is another reason why we feel there is a strong opportunity for a pan-Canadian license. When you look at IMGs and their ability to be credentialed and then brought into the Canadian system, what that looks like is different in every province and territory, and the cost associated with that is significant. So it is a definite barrier in terms of us being able to mobilize those physicians into our workforce. So we believe that when we start talking about things like decreasing those regulatory barriers, looking at things like a national license, it would allow us to remove some of that administrative burden. It would also give the federal government an opportunity to fund and support those physicians to be credentialed and trained and brought into our system. So those are examples of, I think, solutions where the federal government would definitely have levers they could pull that would have a strong outcome. We also believe that by creating that pan-Canadian human health resource strategy, we're then able to go to the medical school and postgraduate training level and make sure that those things are aligning to create the output of both numbers of physicians and types of physicians that are needed in the system.
Thank you, Dr. Smart, and thank you, Madame Zarillo. Now to Mr. Leipert for 5 minutes. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks to the witnesses for being here today. Dr. Smart, I appreciated all of your comments throughout the pandemic. As like many other Canadians, I was sitting in my living room watching way too much TV, but your comments were well voiced during the pandemic, and I appreciate that. I want to start my comments and ultimately, I guess, questions, and probably going to ask all three witnesses to comment at the end. As a bit of background, I had the privilege of serving as health minister in Alberta from 2008 and 2009. One of my first observations was that healthcare had multiple structural problems. We were already at 50% of our provincial budget on healthcare, and what has happened since then, you described today, Dr. Smart, as being on life support and a crisis. One of the first things that I did when I was health minister was I fired 12 regional health boards and 3 other boards and created the Alberta Health Services Board, which runs all the health system in Alberta today very successfully. For too long, in my view, politicians have simply buried their heads in the sand and said, we can't look at changes to how we do healthcare in this country. And so what do we do as politicians? Well, we'll do another study like we're doing here today. Well, I can just about tell you what's going to come out of this study, with all due respect to all of the witnesses who have appeared before us, because we have a majority of, I know Mr. Long doesn't like to be called part of a coalition, so I'll call it an NDP Liberal marriage that happened last week. So what do we got? This is frankly, I can predict what this report's going to look like when we table it.
Mr.
And it'll
Chair,
be another
I'm
report.
going to ask a point of order, Mr. Chair.
Point of order, Madame Zerillo.
This is not going to cut into my time, I hope.
I'm concerned about parliamentary language here. We're talking about a very gendered, discriminatory reality for many, many women over the years, and the member is going to use words like marriage. And, you know, there's just so much, it really is non-parliamentarian to really try to belittle women and to belittle the importance of the work that women do by using ridiculous terms like marriage in regards to government. This is an important study, important to women, important to people that need care in this country.
Thank you, Madame Zerillo.
I don't think
Now
that's
moving into debate, Mr. Leipert, you have.
Well, then why don't we call it a coalition, which it really is anyway. So if that'll make our NDP member a little more happy. So what we have, in my view, is a structural problem in healthcare, and until we address that, no more, we could commit double the money we're committing today, and it'll simply change nothing. We won't go off life support, and we won't get out of a crisis. So here are some of the structural problems, and Dr. Smart, I'd appreciate your comments on this. We have an outdated model of how we pay doctors. We have doctors doing work that clearly other professions could do, but that's the way they get paid. Not the doctor's fault. Again, that's the elected people's fault. Secondly, we have professions within healthcare that are not prepared to change their scope of practice. There are a lot of things that could be done in healthcare at different levels, but professions are pretty strident in what they stand for. And then finally, we have public sector unions that wield far too much power in the public health care system. So I guess I'd be interested in all three of our guests today commenting on whether money is the solution or whether we have a structural problem within healthcare that if we don't address it at the federal level, it's not a case of not getting off life support. This system will crash and burn.
Okay, he's directed it to all three, and you have a minute and 20 seconds left to respond.
I can start. Thank you, Chair,
Thank
for the
you.
question. I certainly agree, and the Canadian Medical Association agrees that we have both issues at hand. There's no question that there are many structural issues within the healthcare system, including outdated payment models, outdated structural models, outdated ways of trying to provide primary care in a traditional siloed fee-for-service model that aren't serving Canadians by any means, and certainly also aren't serving or attracting newer physicians into that style of practice. And that's why you've heard us advocating for integrated team-based care and really the creation of medical homes for patients where they're able to access a variety of healthcare professionals to address their needs. It's absolutely true that our current systems don't necessarily allow for, incentivize that type of care, and it leads often to unnecessary visits and unnecessary things in the system that aren't benefiting patients. It's also why you've heard us speak to the idea of scaling virtual care, as that's another tool that could be used to allow patients better access and to allow more collaboration amongst healthcare professionals to make sure that patients are really seeing the right person at the right time. We do also agree that just by more dollars into a system that's not functioning well, we're not going to have the level of accountability and the deliverables that Canadians deserve. However, it is also clear that the dollars going into healthcare are declining, and that's against an aging population with more complex healthcare needs. So we certainly agree that we need to reimagine the system, really look deeply at what these structural barriers are, understand how we can work in a more integrated and team-based environment, how we can have people working within their scopes and full scopes of practice to benefit Canadians, and at the same time increasing those investments so that the healthcare system is sustainable.
Time, and Mr. Leipert, thank you for your question. Now to Madame Ferrada for 5 minutes.
Oui, merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to inform you that I'll be sharing my time with my colleague, Mr. Koto. I have two quick questions. I hope to be able to share my time. My question will be for Mr. Villeneuve. In a statement you made not long ago in January, you said that government had to work together as a federation in crisis to immediately negotiate an innovative strategy, especially in the area of labor shortages for the care economy. But I'll also ask the question to Ms. Smart on that statement that was signed by two associations for nurses. But I'd like to hear your perspective, Dr. Smart. Earlier, you were talking about a national strategy, but I'd like to hear what you have to say about that idea of how we can address things at the national level. What would those innovative strategies be? You mentioned it a little bit earlier, but I'd like to hear both of you on these innovative strategies, please.
Thank you, Chair. My feed cut out a little bit, but I think I got the gist of the question. We have tabled a number of suggestions in our pre-budget submission, which I'll be happy to share with the committee. But things that tend to work for nurses are boosting staffing, tax incentives, loan forgiveness. And I think the thing that is slightly longer term, but we think is very, very critical and gets somewhat to the other questions asked, we have to do some planning. You know, with no disrespect to my great colleague, Catherine Smart, who's a famous pediatrician, you could trip over pediatricians in this country trying to find someone to care for your elderly parents. And it's the same for nursing. So we must, you know, we don't operate in 13 silos. We're a fluid country and people are educated in one place and they practice in another. We think that a really deep dive into purposeful planning would make a big difference. I don't want to use any more of your time. Thank you.
I'll also comment, I think from our perspective in terms of innovative ideas, we've mentioned some of them today, national licensure is an opportunity to create more mobility within the health workforce. It also creates a lot more opportunities to scale and consider virtual care and how it can be used to address access issues, particularly with things like rural and remote patients being able to access specialist care. And the other piece is really scaling integrated team-based models within the primary care system. We are hearing over and over from our colleagues in family medicine that the old style of fee-for-service siloed business model, family medicine is not attracting new doctors. They want to work in teams. They want to provide collaborative care to their patients. So those two ideas, I think if implemented, would have, you know, quite profound impacts in terms of access and sustainability. Thank you.
Two more minutes.
Can I jump in now? Yeah.
Mr. Coteau?
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, for 2 minutes.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you so much. I have a question for Mr. James Gennaro, but first I just want to say thank you to Mr. Villeneuve for serving the community of Don Valley East, mentioned Sunnybrook, and I just want to say thank you for all the work you've done. And there's no such thing as retirement, so I'm sure we'll see you around sometime in the near future. Mr. Gennaro, quick question. You know, we see posts up there for jobs in the developmental sector always, and they stay there for a long time. Can you just talk a little bit more about why is it so hard to find people specifically in this sector?
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Cota, for the question. So there are many factors that go into it, but the sort of simple boil down point, unfortunately, is to do with wages. Wages in the sector are simply too low, particularly for the work that it entails. So if you imagine it's supporting children and adults with intellectual disabilities, often in a congregate care setting like a group home, which means it's a lot of attending to daily care needs, some feeding, some toileting, lifting, that sort of thing. It's taxing work, it's difficult work. And the wages certainly, unfortunately, at the moment do not match up with the difficulty and the nature of the work. I'll also say, though, that part of it also is the structure of the work. So I alluded earlier in my comments to the ratio of part-time versus full-time work, though as time goes on, a lesson from the pandemic is a move towards full-time work rather than part-time opportunities. We've seen, for example, that those full-time opportunities tend to be scooped up a lot more quickly than part-time opportunities, which I think is a reasonable expectation. And the last thing I'll put on the table here, though, is The developmental services sector, like the personal support worker sector and other parts of caregiving, is often a first job for newcomers to Canada. And one of the realities of certainly of the pandemic over the last couple of years is fewer newcomers coming to Canada and needing that first job. We have certainly felt that pinch across the care network, the care economy, such that we're seeing fewer and fewer new people come up. We're seeing repetition where somebody was in the sector, left the sector, and is now back again for one reason or another. But we're seeing fewer entrants into the sector. We think in part because the pipeline of people interested in these jobs coming from abroad has been narrowed by the pandemic. As hopefully we get to a post-pandemic stage of COVID, we look forward to newcomers coming back to Canada in large numbers and welcoming them into our sector as a great first job. And maybe a second and third job as they get used to life in Canada.
Mr. Coutu, your time is done. If we started a bit late, so to be fair, I'm going to go to Madame Chabot and then Madame Zarillo for one short question to finish out this round. If I see no objections, Madame Chabot, a short question.
Do you believe, we know that with the labor shortage in Quebec, we'll have to ask people to come out of retirement, whether doctors or nurses, and we've created financial conditions so they're not penalized. Could that be a federal solution at the financial level to encourage workers to come out of retirement?
Mr. Chair, I would be pleased to take a short crack at that. I think that's a reasonable solution, Chair. But what we must be careful about is that where we have really major shortages, for example, or we're very pressed in critical care, the kinds of people coming out of retirement may want to step back in and do, for example, we saw a lot doing vaccine clinics and so on, but they may not be as easy to move right into critical care, or acute care and operating rooms and so on, unless they're very, very current. So yes, it will attract some people, but whether it attracts the caliber, I mean that in the sense of the safety of the kinds of people we want, I'm not so sure. We'd have to look at that.
Madame Chabot, Madame Zarillo, one final question.
Thank you.
To you.
Thank you. And I guess I'll put mine to Dr. Smart, just around ancillary economy-driven aspects of the care economy. So we've talked a lot about care work itself. I'm just wondering if Dr. Smart has any comments around what ancillary businesses will also grow and we need to invest in Canada. I'm thinking about PPE and I'm thinking about anything, infrastructure like lifts and things like that. So would love to hear some thoughts around how this will also enhance other areas of the economy.
I think there's definitely opportunities for Canada to grow its economy in terms of things like providing PPE, and also vaccine production, I think, is going to be critical. I think if we're learning anything from COVID, it's that playing field keeps changing. There's still lots of innovation coming with vaccines, and our ability to produce and scale those up within the country, I think, would be quite meaningful. The other area is pharmaceutical production. There's increasing global drug shortages, and the ability to produce and provide pharmaceuticals within Canada would also be a benefit. So I think there's many potential aspects of our economy that would be related to health, where we could be producing things that we need in the healthcare sector that would also be an economic benefit to Canadians. Thank you.
Thank you, witnesses, for your very valuable input into this study and your testimony today before the committee. With that, I will adjourn the meeting for today. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.